Hello everyone. Welcome to our session where we will learn how a dynamic approach to reallocation can increase project and portfolio ROI with Microsoft Project Online and Server. Our speaker is Ben Chamberlain. Ben is UMT 360's Chief Product and Marketing Officer and is responsible for the strategic direction with worldwide go-to-market activities for UMT 360's enterprise portfolio and management solutions. Take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone to today's session. As Andrew said, today we're going to focus on how organizations are moving away from a kind of set it and forget it approach to annual planning to adopt a more of a dynamic planning framework to maximize ROI across their project and program investments. Now, I'm specifically going to talk to you today about how that is achievable on top of the Microsoft PPM platform with UMT 360. So I'm not sure if this slide's meant to be here, but big thanks to all the sponsors of this event. So before I delve into today's main topic, for those of you not familiar with who we are, UMT 360, I'll just provide a quick level set here. UMT 360 is seen as by many as leaders in enterprise portfolio management. Enterprise portfolio management remains a ambiguous term at best in my mind, as vendors from different domains encroach upon the space. When we think about it, we think about providing overarching and often missing business planning controls that organizations need to transform the way they manage all enterprise investments. That could be the way you manage your project and program investments, all the way through to managing other portfolios such as IT assets, business assets that are consuming scarce budget and resources. In the background here, you see accolades that really represent the breadth of our offering. Whether it was the Cool Vendor Award by Gartner in 2012, you only get Cool Vendor once in a vendor's lifetime, so that's why it's still here. But it's specifically given to us for our ability to integrate financial management best practices across the project and program management lifecycle, really making financials a first-class citizen within Microsoft Project Online and Project Server. We're also seen by Gartner as visionaries in one of their latest Magic Quadrants, Integrated IT Portfolio Analysis, which basically is a discipline that helps you to integrate siloed portfolios of projects, applications, infrastructure, align all IT investments against business strategy. We're also the only enterprise portfolio management solution on the marketplace today that is built on the Microsoft PPM platform. So we're a native SharePoint application with seamless integration with Project Online and Project Server, and we've been a Microsoft PPM partner for longer than I care to remember. Not only do we provide implementation services around the Microsoft PPM platform, but we've become well known for building technology that seamlessly extends. In fact, the first solution we built in the early 2000s, UMT Portfolio Manager, was acquired by Microsoft and then integrated into Project Server 2010 and beyond. So if any of you are familiar with demand management, portfolio optimization, and capacity planning capabilities native today in Project 2010, 2013, 2016, and Project Online. So that being said, let's take a look at today's agenda. So we are going to focus on dynamic planning. But first of all, I'm going to take a look at what's wrong with traditional PPM and how organizations there are at risk of losing around 46% of the planned business value from their project and program investments. Then we'll take a look at really 4 things to consider when rolling out a dynamic planning framework within your organization. Why strategic yield is a metric you should consider. Why accurate and reliable forecasting is key before you consider dynamic planning. Look at automation of status reporting and variance analysis and techniques to escalate and provide steering committees with information they need to make timely decisions. Time dependent, we will fire open the tool and take a look at how the combination of Microsoft PPM platform plus UMT 360 can help you deliver on that dynamic planning vision. And then we'll end with a Q&A. So let's jump in. First and foremost, I think it's fair to say that traditional PPM, and when I say traditional PPM, more execution-orientated PPM, is failing to deliver the anticipated results. I think the stats on the far right-hand side here are quite well understood, whether it's Standish Group saying that 18% of projects fail to get implemented, or 43% of projects are challenged, which meaning they come in late or over budget. Gartner saying that 33% or 1 out of 3 completed projects experience significant cost overruns, and the good old PMI even saying that 33% of projects don't meet their intended goals or objectives. As I mentioned, at UMT here, we've been in the PPM space for longer than I care to remember, and our own research shows that when you rely purely on more execution-orientated, maybe even tactical PPM capabilities, you can be at risk of losing up to around 46% of the planned business value from your portfolio. Or another way to look at that is around 46% of that investment in those projects and programs is at risk. There's a variety of reasons for that: unreliable planning, poor financial insight and transparency, as well as not a complete enterprise picture of all the portfolios that are operating within your organization. We're going to drill deep into 2 of those. We can take a look at how unreliable planning and poor financial insight can impact business value. The first is insufficient planning processes that can result in suboptimal demand. All too often, organizations don't have a strong enough top-down planning technique to really ensure they are selecting the right initiatives or projects before moving in to executing them. We work a lot with companies in designing top-down planning techniques that help them better align execution with strategy. And what I found is that there are sort of 3 common approaches that organizations use: project-driven, program-driven, and capability-driven. And it's fair to say there is a kind of maturity step up as you move from left to right here. All approaches are right. They have their relative strengths and weaknesses. And I'll just provide a high-level overview of each of them. The first is the project-driven investment approach, which is probably the most common and one that's catered for fairly well within the Microsoft PPM platform. This is one which tends to be used more in an annual planning process, one where strategy is defined and prioritized with the executive team, often in a silo, and then during that traditional annual planning process, ideas, i.e. projects and programs, are kind of thrown into the hopper, and then using semi-sophisticated techniques aligned against strategy, and then you select the best bundle of projects based on different budget or human resource constraints. This is the methodology that actually UMT originated or came up with in the early 2000s, and back then we really considered this to be a top-down way of working. But hindsight being a 2020 thing, it isn't really, it's bottom-up. I think the problem here is that strategy is defined in a silo, defined and prioritized in a silo, and then the projects are also captured in a silo, then smashed together. I don't think we really ever stop to ask ourselves, what are we doing here? Are we just selecting the best of a questionable bunch of projects? Was that initial demand that was captured in the first place the right demand? So many organizations are looking to overcome that one frailty by adopting program-driven or capability-driven approach to investment management. Program-driven provides a systematic way of decomposition of strategy into key investment programs, and then investment programs into the projects that relate to those programs. So there's a strong correlation between strategy and the resulting execution. The next one, and this is one where organizations, I would say 60 to 70% of the organizations we speak with are directionally moving to over time, is a capability-driven investment approach. And this introduces the concept of business capabilities. These are the core functions that your business runs on. Consider these as kind of the operating fabric of your business. So introduction of a capability model. And by doing a mapping to strategy, to capabilities, you're simply saying, well, what capabilities in my organization are needed to deliver on these strategic imperatives? And maybe you have capabilities that are underperforming, so you make decisions to invest in these capabilities to knock a strategy out of the park, and that results in a project or program. Maybe you have a strategy that has no capabilities supporting it, so you decide to onboard a new capability within the portfolio, and again, that's transacted through a project. So the demand, projects and programs, are definitely the right projects and programs before you look at any technique in terms of which ones to select. Now, another reason why organizations are leveraging the capability-driven investment approach is it also provides a model to aggregate operational investment against strategy too. So being able to aggregate or map applications or IT assets back to the capabilities they automate provides a direct line of sight through from strategy into operational expenditure and activities too. Anyway, failure to be able to identify the right demand in the first place can impact the amount of business value that a portfolio achieves. Next, and I'll probably just build these ones out, poor financial estimates in the planning process can have an impact. Often cost estimates are flawed early in the planning process. So think about it. If the cost estimates are too high, when you look to optimize that portfolio, often you're leaving too many good projects behind and leaving value on the table. And without a methodology to revisit those decisions throughout the year, like we're going to talk about dynamic planning today, that value will remain lost. Let's say the project estimates are too low in the business case across your projects. All that happens is you bring projects have cost overruns, you're simply going to have to cut projects, and again, value will be lost. So poor financial estimating or cost estimating certainly hits you in a back pocket from a business value, a realization point of view. Again, one of the problems with really just relying on an annual planning process is that many organizations step through that kind of quarterly assessment of which projects they're going to do in next year, and then kind of pin their ears back and just deliver on that come hell or high water. But the fact is that things change, and you need to be able to react throughout the year. Maybe strategy changes, maybe cost estimates are wrong. So you need to be able to adopt an approach that allows you to take action and make changes to your in-flight portfolio rather than just execute on the project selected 6 months earlier. Other reasons why value can be lost. We talked about failure rates. So obviously, if you're failing to deliver projects, Standish Group said 18% of projects fail, then you can't claim the value from them. When you have an in-flight portfolio, cost overruns definitely impacts the portfolio value. Budget from a portfolio perspective is definitely finite. So if projects start to have cost overruns, something has to give. At the portfolio level, you're going to have to start to maybe de-scope projects, maybe cancel projects. Maybe you don't even get to do certain projects based on those cost overruns, which will impact the portfolio value. One of the surprising things we found when conducting this research around the 46% was the impact of budget utilization. We found that many organizations today weren't able to spend all their budget during the given fiscal year. Could be for a variety of reasons. Resource shortfalls, simply meaning projects weren't kicked off when they were supposed to be, unplanned carryovers, projects that unexpectedly slip from one fiscal to the next fiscal. Budget doesn't get consumed within that original fiscal year, worse still gets taken away from the next fiscal period, and value is deferred. And last but by no means least was poor forecasting capabilities from project managers. We're going to talk more about that, so I'm going to save that for a later discussion. So what we found is that one of the big problems out there with many PMOs is they focus too much on tactical. They really are focused on being the masters of project and program delivery. So focused on very important activities, schedule, resource management, whatever it may be, but really haven't woken up to the fact that projects at their core are business investments and need to take the responsibility to optimize spend and maximize value. So we see many PMOs today looking to become more strategic in nature and really be comfortable fulfilling two roles in the organization, as I show here, being the master of project and program delivery, but also taking the business responsibility for the portfolio too, and almost becoming the CFO of the project and program portfolio. And some of the things we'll look at today around dynamic planning, around new metrics like strategic yield, definitely falls into this second role here, becoming the CFO of the project and programs. So one thing we look to see strategic PMOs doing is integrating often the critical missing business planning controls across the PPM life cycle. And so this should look familiar to most of us. When we think about the annual planning process, the ability to centralize demand, align demand against strategy, build out robust business case, which includes integrated financial cost and benefit information alongside the traditional schedule and resource information. Looking at techniques which the Microsoft PPM platform provides well for around prioritization and optimization and selection of the best bundle of projects. Then moving into the plan phase, more of a detailed business case before moving into manage, where dynamic planning starts to kick in, the ability to start to compare and track the ongoing performance of projects and programs, and then look on a recurring basis, maybe monthly or quarterly, depending on your organization, to rebalance the portfolio to ensure you're optimizing spend and maximizing value. Of course, from a business planning and controls perspective, it doesn't end there. After the end of the project, you may want to introduce lessons learned or establish a benefits realization framework to actually understand, did the project deliver on those on the objectives it set out to achieve. So, I think establishing the business planning controls is key, but goes broader than the discussion for today. Because today we wanted to zero in really on dynamic planning and looking at how to rebalance a portfolio on an ongoing basis that's often adopted in annual planning. So let's take a look at what dynamic planning looks like. Now, it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention Frank LaRocca at this stage. So Frank LaRocca is the Director of Business Improvement Services at Con Edison in New York. Con Edison is a utilities company in New York. Frank is responsible for a $2 billion capital portfolio, and really is who I consider to be the godfather of dynamic planning. And so rather than give you an overview of dynamic planning in my words, I simply use Frank's. Frank said, the reality is that conditions fluctuate, and assumptions made in annual planning are often flawed. Dynamic planning provides executives with the financial and strategic insight needed to gauge the economic impact of poor project performance and improve decision-making to continuously reallocate funds to optimize budget utilization and maximize ROI across their project portfolios. So again, here we're looking to adopt a more dynamic planning process, looking to continuously reallocate funds to make sure we optimize budget utilization as well as maximize value. And that is key. We want to make sure we're spending all the money in the year, but at the same time, how do we ensure that we're spending the money effectively? And so we're going to look at some of that today. Now, dynamic relocation in itself, I don't think is that new, and the process is relatively simple, and it's kind of articulated here. The idea is that at the start of the year, you start with an original portfolio, a selected portfolio of projects, which obviously was selected under varying budget constraints. And then, obviously, things change, as we've discussed. So cost estimates could be too high, cost estimates could have been too low in the planning process. So you get the idea of sometimes money starts to get released back. If the cost estimates of a project was too high and the project manager realizes they don't need all the funds, they're able to release money or give money back. And that money is welcomed with open arms. The opposite is also true. The cost estimates can be too low or projects just overrun. So you need the ability to be able to request more money, or what's called redirects or incremental funding requests. So more money is requested. Of course you're going to question that. But because we're looking to continuously rebalance the portfolio and maximize value, it certainly would be remiss if we didn't look at, should we fund existing projects more, or should we bring net new projects into the portfolio to maximize the value from the portfolio? So an analysis is done on terms of, should I give more money to the existing projects, or should I fund net new? And at the end of the period, that results in a revised portfolio under the original budget that was approved at the start of the year. So again, whether this occurs on a monthly or quarterly basis, that's down to the organization. Now, I think many organizations are doing this today in some manual manner. And I know Con Edison were certainly doing this manually, and then look for tools to better automate the process so the steering committee had the information at their fingertips and the PMO spent less time manually reconciling information and building the reports to support the decision making. So hopefully this is a familiar process, but we're going to look today at how to implement that process, and then maybe a demo in terms of how we can automate that process. So we're going to take a look at things to consider when implementing a dynamic planning framework. And there's many things, but we just distilled it down to 4 here. The need for a new metric in PPM, strategic yield. We'll take a look at what that's all about. Why quite honestly, until you improve a culture for forecasting in the organization, the dynamic planning will remain a futile exercise. So we'll look at the importance of forecasting. How to automate status reports to drive variance analysis, and then to give the steering committee the information they need to support decisions, when to double down on existing projects, when to bring in net new projects to optimize spend and maximize value. So let's take a look at strategic yield. Strategic yield is an interesting metric to me. It's one that's been used for years, but it's always kind of been hidden away. And strategic yield is a metric that can be used in a variety of ways and is key, in my mind, in terms of dynamic planning, where we're going to evaluate pending and in-flight projects to make decisions in terms of when to invest more in existing or when to bring in net new. So strategic yield is pretty simple concept. It takes strategic value, so the strategic value score of the project, an absolute score, and divides it by its cost to give a strategic yield score. Obviously, value and cost can fluctuate at any time during the project's life, so in turn, yield can fluctuate. So how is strategic yield used? I think many of you that's utilizing Project Server or Project Online to its fullest today are actually using yield. Maybe you're not aware that you are. So the first and foremost, yield is used to calculate the bang for the buck for each investment, value over cost. So a very effective way of stack ranking and optimizing the project portfolio. As I mentioned, for those of you using the portfolio optimization analysis native to Project Online and Project Server, this yield calculation is utilized within the linear optimization program within the cost constraint analysis. The next way is that, and something that's frustrated me for years, is that many organizations will use things like yield or value in the upfront annual planning exercise, but then forget about it in terms of the ongoing evaluation of their project and program portfolios, their in-flight project and program portfolios. Strategic yield acts as a kind of investment viability indicator and can be used to assess both in-flight at the same time. So again, you think about an investment viability indicator. If the cost of a project increases and value stays the same, yield automatically decreases and acts as an early warning indicator from an investment viability point of view. It's also a measure that can be aggregated to the portfolio level and used to assess the planned yield of a portfolio versus the forecasted or even actual yield of a portfolio. So provides some ongoing indication in terms of your budget effectiveness or how effectively you're utilizing your budget throughout the year. So as of anything, it's garbage in, garbage out. So let's take a look at how really you can derive a good strategic yield score by deriving a good strategic value and a good cost estimate or cost forecast for a project. Now, none of this is necessarily net new. So when we look at strategic value, first of all, we need to define a set of actionable and measurable business drivers. And so for those of you familiar with this capability of the Microsoft PPM solution, obviously you can look to create and publish a set of business drivers within the business driver library. But again, they should be actionable, meaning they should be able to append projects to them. They should be measurable, meaning that if you can define a KPI for these business drivers or business strategy, you'll be able to measure them against that, and unique. So how to define a good set of business drivers? Often you can break down and build a draft set of business drivers, looking at annual reports and marketing material of an organization. You're then going to convene the executives to really validate and define the business drivers and drive consensus around those business drivers, as well using those measurable KPIs to look at defining objective impact statements that are going to be used to assess a project's contribution against each one of the business drivers. Now, one of the most overlooked activities, which again is catered for well in the Microsoft PPM platform, is a way to objectively prioritize strategy using the pairwise comparison technique, again engaging with the executives to look at comparing the importance of each business driver to one another for the upcoming planning period, and then ultimately deriving a normalized priority score for the strategy. A relative score that is very important as it easily allows us to understand the relative importance of each business driver. See the top one here has 28%, the bottom one has 4%. Also acts as a scale, allowing us to assess investment alignment with strategy too. So in this example, if I had $100 to spend on my strategy and I wanted to ensure total investment alignment, I would stick $28 on the top business driver and $4 on the bottom. So having engaged the executive team, which is very important to define and objectively drive consensus around those business driver priorities, we can look at defining an absolute strategic value score by doing an impact assessment of how each project will contribute to the success of each one of the business drivers. And the important aspect is here, we look to derive an absolute strategic value score because we want to track that score through the life of the project. So again, to derive a good strategic value score, you really need to start off by defining a good set of business drivers and look at driving good a good consensus around those priorities, and then develop those impact statements so you can quantify that strategic value score for each one of the competing investments. The next part of that strategic yield score was cost. So we looked at value, and now we're going to take a look at cost. So obviously, going beyond just capturing one custom field with cost information as a cost estimate for a project, which is going to be invariably orders of magnitude wrong, is something we need to do. So what do we need to look to do to overall improve the financial information within the Microsoft PPM platform? Well, first and foremost, we want to look to standardize financial structures within the Microsoft PPM platform. We then want to move away from tools like Excel and really make financial information a first-class citizen within your Microsoft PPM platform. The ability to deal with what I call financial amplification, which is a simple acknowledgement of the fact that the deeper you get into a project's life cycle, the more and more financial information is going to be required. So to go from yearly assessments in the early case business case to monthly assessments in a detailed business case is key, because we want to evolve the financial estimates as well as schedule and resource estimates for a project. We see organizations today really looking to become more strategic and integrate both top-down budgeting and planning capabilities with bottom-up planning capabilities within the Microsoft PPM platform. So integration of top-down and bottom-up is certainly key too. Deriving snapshots around all metadata pertaining to the projects is key, and so being able to maintain audible snapshots to record key financial information at key stages in the life cycle is important. Now, having looked at locking down budgets for a project, then being able to automate the financials, and we'll look how change requests really become a foundation for the dynamic planning process in a second. So, step 2, accurate and reliable forecasts. As I mentioned, you shouldn't really think about starting a dynamic planning framework within your organization until you've addressed the forecasting deficiencies in our organization. Frank LaRocca from Con Edison recalls when he started implementing a dynamic planning framework at Con Edison, he first asked the project managers for the remaining costs on a project, and they all came back to him with simply the budget less actuals to date, and say that's what's remaining. He said, no, I could do that easily in Excel in half the time. I want you to tell me what you think you're going to spend to complete this project. So we have to invest more in training of the project managers in terms of the importance of forecasting. We also have to recognize the fact that we have a whole different set of project managers, from the kind of accidental project manager all the way up to the PMI certified project manager, that require a certain level of training too. So investing in training is key around the importance of forecasting and how to build better estimates and better forecasts. But also we need the project managers to have a different mindset. We need them to understand portfolio concepts. They have to understand that their project is one small cog in the bigger machine, or in this case, the portfolio is the sum is greater than all the parts. So although they're going to be bonused or rewarded based on the success or failings of their own projects, they have to realize that success of the organization is going to be at the portfolio level, and so they need to also have that mindset of maximizing value at that level. Now, it's not just a change in mindset from the project managers that's important. What we found is that the executives also have to change the way that they think. Often there's cultural issues that stop good forecasting behavior. In many organizations, it's better to come in grossly under, so complete a project sort of grossly under the costs that were originally estimated than come $1 over. Project managers are often beaten up when their projects come in high from a cost perspective. And executives really have to understand that they need to develop a culture, because it is actually as bad at the portfolio level to have a budget utilization problem if they don't all spend all the money during the year, as it is for certain projects to come in over. So there needs to be a change in the executive's mindset to develop a culture in the organization where a project manager feels like they can request more money without fear of recrimination, because that in turn will allow for the project manager to feel that they can release money and give it back. Now, until you've addressed that, dynamic planning is an exercise in futility. So you've got to look at overcoming some of the cultural barriers to good forecasting in an organization. Other things you consider in terms of improving estimating are things like differences in different funding models, but I'm not going to go too deep into that today. So we looked at the importance of yield as a metric, the importance of accurate and reliable forecasting. Now let's look more at the mechanics of the dynamic planning process and the importance of automating status reporting and variance analysis as a key intake or input into that process. So when we think about status reporting from an in-flight project perspective, it's often a painful process for PMOs, with spending most of their time manually reconciling information and building reports. So the ability to automate this process, especially from a financial status reporting perspective, is key. So the ability for the PMO to automatically open a status report, notify the PMs that the report needs to be completed. Look to reconcile information from other systems. Actual costs, 9 times out of 10 exist in the ERP system, so being able to pull that into the Microsoft PPM platform and have that automatically displayed within the status reporting is key. The PM can then complete the actual costs for that period, as well as capture that all-important forecast information to derive variance analysis. Now, at this point, this is where change requests can be made or raised for 2 reasons. One, to request more money if forecast is greater than plan, or one, to give back money if it looks like they're not going to be able to spend all the money. So we'll talk more about change requests in a second. The PM then can submit and lock the report and automatically notify the PMO that they are done, and that leads to the reports and dashboards being automatically triggered. So what's important here? Obviously, there are a lot of metrics that we're going to track within generic status reporting, but really we want to look at the impact on cost as well as yield. Yield being the kind of effectiveness and value maximization of a project. In this particular example here, this project is forecasting a 32% overrun, and we can see that it's had a negative impact on the yield, because if cost rises and value stays the same, yield must fall, and that's acting as an early warning investment viability indicator to suggest there may be better buys in the portfolio. So you can see at this instance how yield is being used beyond the traditional annual planning cycle to provide that investment viability indicator during the life of the project. So there are different ways that projects can be grouped coming out of this status reporting process. So we tend to group projects into 3 camps through the variance analysis. The first are positive variance. So what is that? That is, forecast is greater than the budget. So what do we want the project manager to do? We want a project manager to raise a change request and ask for more money, something that we term a redirect. So this is simply requesting more money because the project is forecasting that overrun. Next is the opposite, is a negative variance where forecast is less than the budget. This is where we want a PM to instantly raise a change request to freely give back money or release funds so they can be reallocated or reinvested across the portfolio. And the last is what we call a potential underspend or a to-date variance. This is where the actuals to date are less than the plan, but the project manager is forecasting that he and she will spend all the money by the end of the year or the end of the project. And the truth is, these are the projects that often result in Q4 budget utilization problems, where we don't know about the available funds until too late in the year. It's too late to reallocate those funds to drive more value within that fiscal period. So there's a concept here of the PMO watching these projects closely and maybe more aggressively taking back money from these projects when they do not believe that they're going to spend the money during that given period. So this is what raised here, change requests being raised for redirects, releases, and potential more aggressive takebacks based on these particular symptoms. So next we want to make sure the information can be surfaced to the steering committee, and we empower the steering committee to then take and make decisions, regardless of the cadence, whether this is done on a monthly or quarterly basis. So as I mentioned, change requests really are the conduit for dynamic planning. So change requests are raised, they're packaged in either releases or takebacks or redirects. As I mentioned up front, you never question release. If someone wants to give you money back at the portfolio level, you're going to welcome it with open arms. But you are going to question the redirects. If someone wants more money, you're simply going to assess the viability of those redirects or incremental funding requests, and also look at new potential projects in the pipeline to make a decision. Do I want to invest more in this existing project, or do I want to start a net new project? What's that going to do for me from a budget utilization perspective, and also from an overall yield perspective across the portfolio? So am I optimizing all my spend, and am I maximizing the value from the portfolio? And this, again, as you can see from this graphic, is how we can help the steering committee, because now we can simply look at stack ranking the in-flight committed projects, which again are requesting more money, with the net new or pipeline projects, the new project requests, and using strategic yield as that common denominator to look to maximize the overall value or yield from the portfolio. So in this example, you can see that the line is drawn based on the available funds around Project 8, and the solution is suggesting that you can double down in some of these committed projects, but maybe you should consider bringing in some pipeline projects to maximize the overall value from the portfolio. So again, providing the steering committee with this type of insight, along with other insight, to support these decisions at a click of a button is important, allowing them to make the decisions and then update the portfolio before the next review period. Okay, so what I thought we'd do, and we'll keep this relatively brief, maybe 10 minutes or so. We'll take a look a little bit of some of these concepts in action. We're on top of the Microsoft PPM solution with UMT360 enabled. So if I do so, let me bring the tool up. So what we're looking at here is UMT360 on top of Microsoft Project Server 2013. Of course, you can achieve all the same within Project Online and also Project 2016 when fully available. Now, what I'm going to do is really showcase just the dynamic planning portion of this demonstration environment. What will be apparent if you haven't seen UMT360 with Microsoft Project Server or Project Online before is seamless integration. You won't know where one tool stops and the other starts, and that's by design. One of the things we're looking to do here is to integrate financial information so that you can support this kind of decision making seamlessly within Microsoft Project Online or Project Server. I want financial information to be a first-class citizen alongside schedule information and resource information, and I don't want financial information being necessarily decoupled and annexed in Excel or other systems, prohibiting fast and accurate decision making. So, that being said, let's just focus in on some of the financial status reporting. So here, we see a number of widgets. So I'm going to focus on cost tracking and variance analysis. Obviously, there's a whole host of dashboards and reports that come out of the box. This one is really just looking at the committed portfolio. This is in-flight projects. And you can see it broken down by the departments. So we're able to look at just the committed projects, which is a bottom-up view. Just projects that are in flight relating to finance, HR, IT, operations, sales and marketing. And we're looking at variance, which is forecast versus budget at this stage, and we can look at variance by department. One thing you're also able to do, and I mentioned the importance earlier of integrating top-down budgeting with bottom-up estimating and tracking, is that we can also record budgets at any level within a portfolio hierarchy. So I can look at kind of the bottom-up variance here, but I can also look at top-down variance by comparing the top-down allocated budget by department with the bottom-up forecast coming from the projects that have been committed. Now, it's important because we always want to assess where we are from a top-down budget utilization perspective throughout the year, because we do not want to leave money on the table and, in turn, value on the table by the end of the year. So, of course, being able to drill down here and see cumulative budget actuals forecast is important. Here we're simply seeing a utilization problem. Forecast is less than plan at this stage. We may want to drill down to learn more about that. So I mentioned that 360 is looking to automate the financial status reporting within the Microsoft PPM platform. Now, this is the grouping of projects that I mentioned to you earlier, and the output of that variance analysis. So you can see how we have projects grouped here by three categories. The cost overruns. These are the projects with forecast greater than plan. So we're going to expect decisions to be made here. Are we going to give them more money or approve a change request for these? Are we going to descope them? Are we going to cancel them? But quite honestly, it's too early to make that decision just yet. So we have the cost overruns. That's the first grouping. The second is the opposite, the underspends. These are the projects with forecasts less than plan. These are the ones where we want money to be released instantaneously and then make a decision. Do we give more to these projects, or do we bring in net new projects from the pipeline? But of course, I mentioned the takebacks as well, the potential underspends. These, again, are the projects which are, to date, actual costs are less than plan, but yet the PM is saying, I'm going to spend all the money by the end of the project. So they're forecasting they're going to spend all the money. And you're going to watch these ones closely and decide when to take money back off them. But simply grouping projects in these three camps is the foundation to dynamic planning, and it's done so through simple variance analysis. So if I take a look at Health Assessment Reporting Tool, one of the projects here, we can drill down and see an integrated dashboard that's bringing together some of the important execution-orientated information coming from the Microsoft PPM platform, supported by some of the financial and strategic information that 360 is bringing to the table. So this is similar to the screenshot I showed earlier. This project is running 32% over budget. But again, strategic yield is not just used once in approving a project in the annual planning process. It is monitored through the life of the project. So in this case, we can see that the yield of this project is falling because the cost has gone up 32%. The value stayed about the same. So we can instantaneously ask the question, what should we do with this project? Should we bring some? Should we give it more money? Should we descope it? Should we be bringing in another project from the pipeline? So of course there's a lot of status reporting and visualization that can be seen up here. But what I want to do is drill down to the project record within Project Server and take a look at how 360 is extending. Because what we can see here from the workflow visualization is that this project is in execution. So the way this workflow has been built out here, at this final go, no-go point here, we locked our budgets and we start to track the ongoing performance of the project. Notice how financial information is integrated within the project record. So I have my approved budgets here. I'm now starting to track costs and forecast costs. So it is seamlessly integrated alongside schedule and resource information. Now, if you go back to that graphic where I talked about the automation of status reporting, it's very important for a PMO to be able to open and publish status reports across in-flight projects. So notify project managers that an open status report is ready. So we're in August here, reporting on projects in July. So the open status report is July. 360 also includes an import mechanism from SAP, Oracle Financials, and others to simply pull through the actual costs for all in-flight projects for each period. So often you would expect this actual column to be already displaying the actuals from the ERP system, but of course it could be manually entered or even imported in from timesheets too. But in this view here, you're simply going to expect the actuals to be captured, and then variance will be generated based on budget, to date, period, whatever is needed. But the important information is now to capture the remaining costs. So again, being able to, at the time of approval, capture the budget, but then move the budget to the forecast table that you're seeing here is important. And at that point, forecasts can change. So this grades columns here means simply these are past periods and I can't change, but I can come in and update the forecast for the remaining periods. And again, this can be integrated with a schedule too. So we're seeing the integrated financial structure and the ability to forecast on the granularity of your choosing for the remaining periods. Now, the charts that I was showing you earlier are all generated from this. So having captured the actuals and forecast, then I can come in, I can submit my status report. I'm automatically then, as a project manager, locked out of the system. The PMO is notified they're complete. Now, this project was running 32% over budget. So again, if we want to enable dynamic planning, we use change requests as one of the bridges to do so. So what I expect a project manager to do now, because this project is running over budget, is request more funds. So I can come in here and create a new change request and have that routed for approval. What I'm going to do is cheat, just to save time. What I'm going to do is actually automatically generate a change request. I'm going to copy my forecast data to my budget table. So I'm going to attempt as a PM to update my budget based on what I perceive the future to be, the forecast. But the tool is going to tell me, look, there's no way I'm going to let you do that. Absolutely not. It's in execution, therefore you're going to have to request a change. So when I accept that, a change request will be automatically raised. So if I look here now, I can see there's a change request in the log, and I can drill down, learn more about that change request, and I can have governance rules sending this to approvers to approve the change request based on the delta of funds. So if approved, the project budget will be updated. If rejected, it simply won't. We just keep an auditable record of those changes. So think about using change requests as a way to request more money, or conversely, to give back money or release funds. So I've kind of shown you how actual cost and forecast cost as well as budget can be integrated at the project level. But let's take this up to the portfolio level. So if I go to some of the reports and dashboard views here, I'm just going to pick it up on a change request analysis. Here we're looking at all the change requests that have been raised across the portfolio. And remember, we talked about two types of change requests. There were the releases, money that's being given back. So these are the projects that are actually giving back funds. They're giving back $407,000 worth of funds. Now think about what that does to the yield of the project. You're, in theory, getting the same value from the project for less money, so the yield is going to increase. So you're going to get more yield from these investments. Now we have the redirects, the projects that are requesting more money. So we have $790,000 of additional funds being requested for these projects. What's that going to do to the yield? We're now asking for more money to deliver the same value potentially. So it's going to decrease the yield. So these projects are delivering more yield. These projects are in theory delivering less yield across the portfolio. Now, as I mentioned, releases are automatically accepted, and we're going to look at whether we fund the redirects and potentially new projects too. So at the portfolio level, what you're seeing here is that we have a total organizational budget, top-down budget of $20 million. but yet the in-flight projects that we've committed to date are totaling 17.8 million. Now, the additional money being requested is 383,000, which is the total redirects, 790, less the $407,000 worth of redirects. So that's the 383,000. So what impact's that going to have? Well, of course, that's going to increase our adjusted budget, if accepted, to 18.2 million. But we still have a problem, right? We still have a budget utilization problem. We still have $2.3 million to burn. We want to utilize that money. But more importantly, what impact is it having on the yield? So the current yield of the portfolio is 101.59. It's the aggregate yield across all the projects. So we're getting this 101.59 yield for this $17.8 million. But if we accept this change to the portfolio, our yield actually goes up to 113. Why? Because the yield of the leases was greater than the yield being given, or the loss of yield, sorry, coming from the incremental funding requests or the redirects. So on the surface, this looks like a good thing because we're spending a bit more money. There's still money to burn, but also we're improving the yield that we're getting from the portfolio. So we're spending more wisely, being more effective with that budget. So the next thing you can look to do is take it one step further. I can now start to bring in all the pipeline projects or the net new requests and stack rank them against the committed projects requesting more money, and then use yield again as that common denominator to draw the line. So we have $5.9 million available funds here, and this is where the line is being drawn based on the available funds. And what we're seeing here is a couple of pipeline projects are being recommended, as well as some committed projects to invest in. So again, you can use this kind of insight to make a decision when to maybe descope a project, when to cancel an in-flight project, and when to bring a net new project in from the pipeline to maximize value and, of course, optimize spend or budget utilization across the period. Now, I know we were going to pause around the 50-minute mark for potential questions. I will pause now. See if there are any. I think Andrew may or may not have some.
Currently, I don't have any questions, but the discussion board is available to the right side of the project virtual conference page, and you can also stick around after the video if there were any other questions to continue chatting. Okay, so pose questions if you have any. What I'll do is just click on a few more screens just to sort of finish off the demo, and then we'll round up with or round off with some slides. So the idea of those change requests being automatically available, being able to see the impact on the portfolio level is key. Now I can start to track changes made throughout the year. So if I go to this dynamic reallocation dashboard now, you can see what we're starting to track. We're looking by period how we're looking at yield variance, so are we maximizing our yield, as well as budget utilization. Two key metrics which I consider to be important for the CFO of the project and program portfolio. So I can now start to really do an assessment of the impact that the PMO is having on a period-by-period basis, because we can start to track through snapshotting what the budget was going into a period. Here we're tracking on a monthly basis. How much money was released by project managers during that period? Did we bring in any net new projects into the portfolio? And how much additional funding requests were made from existing projects? But at the same time, always looking at keeping a key eye on, are we utilizing all the available budget, and what impact are we having from a yield perspective, from a yield variance perspective. So I can keep a keen eye on all those things, and by the end of the year I can actually start to generate metrics like portfolio churn, where you can see what impact did the PMO have, how much did we move around money to maximize value. Because let's face it, it's easy to spend more money, but it's much harder to spend money effectively. So these type of visualizations are certainly important. Other views that we see organizations then adopting is to start to track things like estimating accuracy, as well as looking at things like budget utilization. Ben?
Yeah.
I have a question from Jigs. He would like to know, he says he's assuming that this is a plugin for Project Server 2013.
Yes, it works. Unity 360 is a native SharePoint application, and by virtue of that has seamless integration with Project 2013 and Project Online as well. So yeah, it's available directly within Project Zero. So this view here is simply looking at budget utilization. What I've found is that there are a lot of information within the PPM tool, especially when you start to include financial information as well, that we're not surfacing correctly. So budget utilization tends to be a problem for many organizations. So starting to track how well you utilize the budget year over year is important. So here we're simply seeing how budget was more effectively utilized year over year by comparing the top-down budget with what was actually spent and looking at generating the budget utilization metric. Another metric that we start to see organizations using a lot is estimating accuracy, because you can start to really at a departmental level look at how good departments or even individuals are at estimating. So this view here is simply taking each department that we have defined here and looking at the budget deviation. So what's the average budget deviation across all departments? You can see that HR here historically is overestimating, or coming in over, sorry, the budget, whereas the other departments are coming in under, so have a budget utilization problem. So if we were to drill down, let's say into one of those, let's take IT, for example, we can start to see the spread of the projects. So these are now projects and where they ended up. So in IT, they got a sort of average budget utilization around 88% or so. These projects came in over budget, these projects came in under budget, and that's the average budget deviation. So you can start to surface this intelligence to the leaders of any department to suggest, look, we need to work on estimating accuracy, and you can start to, again, track estimating accuracy year over year as well. The other area that we see being used a lot, let me select the right one, is more views around historic trending patterns. So a lot is said about predictive analysis in terms of how do we predict where we're going wrong, but often you can use empirical information or historical information to help predict the future. So this is used a lot, because once you start to track average spending patterns from previous years, you can start to really better predict the future. What this chart is showing is that the bottom line here is showing the average spending patterns across a couple of years. And the top line is actually showing what the project managers are forecasting. So what you often see in this case is in Q3, Q4, that the forecasts start to get more aggressive and show a spike in spending in Q3, Q4. But if you compare that with previous year's spending patterns, you'll notice that you never ever achieve that. So we have companies using this to greater effect to more accurately predict where they're going to end up from a spending point of view at the end of the year by simply taking the forecasts and assessing how the same project managers performed in previous years, and then able to provide insight in terms of where you think you're going to end up. So once you've got this information, budget, actuals, forecasts, once you've built some discipline around dynamic planning, all this information is at your fingertips to start to get greater insight into your project and program financial performance.
Ben, we're just about out of time.
Yeah, so with that, I'm going to switch to the slides. So key takeaways for today, I think we need to think about, are we managing projects or managing business investments? Let's not settle for that set it and forget it approach of annual planning. Let's start to onboard techniques like strategic yield that are going to help us more effectively utilize all our budget. And if you're considering dynamic planning, let's not underestimate the importance of forecasting and address some of the cultural deficiencies before attempting dynamic planning. Now, if you want to learn more about UMT 360, how we seamlessly extend the Project Server, Project Online environment around financial planning and analysis, all the way through to enterprise program management and asset portfolio management, please visit umt360.com, and there's certainly lots of ways that you can look to get started. So with that, we are on the hour. I want to thank you for your time today. We do have another session tomorrow morning, Pacific Standard Time, which is 7 a.m. Yeah, and well, we're going to focus specifically on how to integrate financial management data within Microsoft PPM platform. So thanks for your time today.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good day.